5 reasons why being alone after 60 might be hurting you more than you realize. You've made it past 60. You're independent, strong. But what if living alone is quietly taking more from you than you realize? In this video, I'm going to show you 5 powerful reasons why being alone might be hurting your health, your heart, and your happiness, and what you can do to take back control. Welcome to Talk with John, your trusted space for real stories and smart advice for life after 60. I'm John, and I've spent over 40 years working in the field of health and wellness for men and women in midlife and beyond. Let's dive into that reasons now. 1. Loneliness affects both the body and the mind. I once met Mrs. Helen, 72 years old, a woman who seemed to be doing just fine. She lived alone. Every morning she watered her plants, went grocery shopping, and cooked her own meals. She read books, listened to music, and even learned how to use a smartphone. From the outside, it looked like she was enjoying a peaceful, independent retirement. But during a quiet one-on-one conversation, she looked at me for a long moment and then said softly, "John, I'm not afraid of being alone. What scares me is the feeling that no one knows I exist." That sentence felt like a sow that landed right in the middle of my chest. It turns out, loneliness isn't just about having no one next to you. It's when you have the whole world around you, but no one truly sees you. No one looks into you, touches you emotionally, or remembers you. Mrs. Helen told me she often had trouble sleeping. Sometimes, while doing the dishes, she'd suddenly forget what she was doing. And on some nights, the ticking of the clock felt so loud it was as if she was slowly disappearing, beat by beat. Loneliness doesn't just chill the soul, it seeps into the body, quietly but fiercely. A study from the University of California found that prolonged social isolation increases the risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, depression, and cognitive decline. Another study published in JAMA Psychiatry revealed that older adults who feel socially disconnected face up to a 26% higher risk of early death. Why? Because when you're chronically lonely, your body enters a constant stress alert mode, releasing cortisol, the stress hormone, which disrupts sleep, weakens the immune system, and gradually clouds the mind. And the scariest part of loneliness, it doesn't scream, it doesn't show itself, it just quietly, slowly drains you, physically and emotionally, one piece at a time. If you're living alone and you find yourself speaking less, sleeping poorly, or feeling less willing to share, ask yourself, am I becoming like Mrs. Helen? Don't wait until you are exhausted to realize how valuable it is, just to have someone to talk to. 2. Losing connection makes life feel less meaningful. Frank, an old friend of mine, once shared something with me over coffee in a quiet corner of the cafe. Waking up with no one to tell your dream to, suddenly the day just doesn't feel worth looking forward to. That sentence might sound simple, but in his eyes, I saw a quiet emptiness that words couldn't fully capture. Frank wasn't sick, he wasn't poor, but he was quietly saddened by the fact that he no longer had anyone to share a normal, ordinary day with. You know, the meaning of life rarely lies in grand gestures. It often shows up in the little things. Someone asking if you're tired today, someone remembering what day you love to eat your favorite soup, or simply someone sitting beside you, even if no words are exchanged. When we lose those small connections, we start to drift away from the current of life itself. Day after day, you're still here, eating, sleeping, going through the motions. But deep down, you stop feeling like you truly exist in anyone's heart. A long-term study from Harvard found that the quality of your relationships has a bigger impact on your happiness in old age than money or even physical health. Those with meaningful emotional bonds tend to live longer, stay healthier, and maintain a more positive outlook. And no, this doesn't mean you need to be in a romantic relationship. It just means there should be someone somewhere with whom you can simply be yourself. Someone who allows you to not be strong all the time. Someone who, if you disappeared one day, would actually feel the absence. 3. Too much independence can quietly turn into a heavy burden. I once knew a man named Larry, 68 years old. He'd been widowed for over a decade. He was still in good health, drove himself to the grocery store, and even went jogging now and then. People around him would often say, he's doing great on his own. And yes, he was. Until one day Larry slipped in the bathroom. No one knew. It wasn't until the second night, when the lights in his house stayed on till morning, that a neighbor realized something was wrong. That moment stayed with me for a long time. We often think of independence as a sign of strength, especially at this age. We don't want to bother anyone. We don't want to seem weak. So we tell ourselves, I'm fine. But are we really? Independence is a beautiful trait, but when you carry it for too long, to the point where no one even knows you're struggling, it stops being a strength and becomes an invisible burden. A kind of isolation we unintentionally build around ourselves. Have you ever hidden a pain because there was no one to tell? Have you ever managed every appointment, every prescription, every chore, simply because you didn't know who to ask for help? Have you ever gone to the doctor alone, heart pounding with worry, wishing someone was there in the waiting room? Science has shown that the feeling of being supported, even just emotionally, helps people recover faster from illness, boosts the immune system, and lowers the risk of depression in older adults. Having someone by your side isn't about having them do things for you. It's about letting life feel just a little bit lighter, so that if something ever goes wrong, someone will know. So that if you're tired, someone will remind you it's okay to rest now. Living alone isn't the problem, but carrying everything by yourself for too long can slowly tear your heart apart, and you may not even realize it's happening. 4. Without someone to reflect you, you slowly lose yourself. There was a time after my wife passed away when I lived alone for nearly 6 months. I still woke up early, still made coffee, still read the paper, but for no particular reason. Everything I did felt like a shadow repeating itself. No one saw, no one waited, no one cared. And then one day, I realized I no longer knew who I was. That might sound abstract, but it's very real. When you have no one to talk to, no one to argue with, no one to say, I don't like that, you slowly lose the ability to truly see yourself. The truth is, we don't need someone just to lean on. We need someone to reflect us, to remind us through their eyes that we are still here, still alive, still connected to something. Without that reflection, we start letting go of the small things that once brought us joy. We stop eating the meals we used to love. We abandon books we once couldn't put down. And eventually we stop telling our unfinished stories because no one is listening anymore. I once counseled an elderly woman named Marie. She said to me, I'm doing okay, John, but sometimes I feel like I'm becoming invisible. Her words stopped me cold. All of us grow quieter with age, that's natural. But there's a difference between peace and fading. And that difference lies in this one simple truth. Is there still someone who sees you? A study from the Canadian Institute of Psychology found that seniors with at least one emotionally reflective relationship, whether it's a friend, a relative, or a neighbor, have nearly twice the emotional vitality as those living in complete isolation. So if you've been feeling less talkative, less thoughtful, less emotionally alive lately, maybe it's not your age. Maybe it's because you're slowly losing the one thing we all need to stay whole, someone to reflect us back to ourselves, someone to remind you, you're still you. 5. The heart grows cold when there's no one left to love. Linda, 66 years old, living alone for nearly 20 years, once told me something that left me speechless. I don't need a man, John, but I miss what it feels like when someone asks me, have you eaten? Are you cold? Did you sleep well? Some people spend their whole lives being strong, independent, in control of everything. But deep down, they still miss one small thing, the feeling of being genuinely cared for. We don't all need romantic love, but we all need a kind of emotional connection, the kind that makes us feel we matter to someone and that someone matters to us. When you live alone for too long, your heart starts to cool. You stop feeling that flutter when the doorbell rings. You stop waiting for messages. You stop hoping someone might come home in the rain. Eventually you tell yourself, I'm used to it, but the truth is you haven't forgotten. You've simply folded your heart closed like an old book, trying to keep it from hurting every time the silence gets too loud. I once asked an elderly gentleman, do you ever feel lonely? He said, not really, I've gotten used to it. But sometimes I leave the balcony light on longer than usual, hoping someone might ask why. His words hit me like a lump in the throat. You know, a study from the Harvard Center for Mental Health found that giving and receiving affection in old age, even something as simple as a hug, a hand squeeze, or a bedtime check-in, helps regulate heart rate, reduces the risk of cognitive decline, and boosts oxytocin, the hormone of emotional bonding. Love doesn't have to be dramatic. It just needs to be warm enough to remind us that our hearts are still beating for someone out there. Dear friend, I didn't write this to make you poeti or to say that living alone is wrong. I wrote it because I've seen the same pattern in hundreds of stories. Strong, quiet, independent people. And then one day they find themselves asking, is this really all there is to life in old age? If you're doing just fine on your own, I truly celebrate that. But if anything I've shared feels familiar to you, maybe it's time to let yourself soften a little. Not everyone needs a romantic partner, but everyone deserves someone to share a meal with, to send a sleep well message, or to sit beside you in a peaceful silence. Growing older isn't the end of the story. It's a brand new chapter, one you have full permission to rewrite, with more peace, with deeper connection, and most of all, with a heart that still feels warm. If you saw yourself in any part of this message, don't stay silent. Start with a message, a phone call, a simple invitation for coffee. Sometimes one small step opens the door to an entirely new path. And if you don't know where to begin by saying it. Let someone know, I'm still here and I still want to be connected. I truly believe that can change the entire course of the rest of your life. Finally, if you found it helpful, please like video and share it with someone you love. You might just help them enjoy a longer, more fulfilling life too. Thank you for watching the Talk with John channel. I'm John. See you in the next episode.